Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Connect lesson. We are going to be in Acts chapters 22 and 23 today as we continue our Gospel Project curriculum. So go ahead and turn there. We're going to see in this passage that God strengthens his people through his presence. God strengthens his people through his presence. Now, what's been going on here in Acts is that Paul has been traveling around and preaching the gospel to all sorts of people, and not everyone's real happy about that. And so he actually ends up being taken captive. He's taken prisoner like we've seen before, but this time it seems to be getting really serious, and he's going before different groups of people and being tried, and there's people that are trying to get him killed, and most of those people are from Jewish leaders in Jerusalem, a similar kind of group of people that ended up condemning Jesus to death. But these people are now going after one of Jesus' followers. They're going after Paul. And what has happened now is they've taken him before a Roman official, similar to how they took Jesus before Pontius Pilate. They are now taking him before a Roman tribune. And so that's what takes us to Acts chapter 22. We're going to start reading in Acts 22, verse 30, and then we're going to skip around a little bit. But starting in verse 30, it says, "But on the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews, he unbound him and commanded the chief priests and all the council to meet, and he brought Paul down and set him before them." So pause. What's happening is this Roman tribune, this Roman official, is trying to figure out what's going on here. He's like, why did these Jews want Paul killed? What's Paul saying? What's the big deal here? So he's trying to figure all of this out. We're going to skip down to chapter 23, verse 6. It says, "Now when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, 'Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial.' And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say there's no resurrection, nor angels, nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply, 'We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or angel has spoken to him?' So what's happening here is Paul sees something in the crowd that is actually to his advantage. So Paul, you've got in this scene, you've got Paul, you've got this Roman tribune, this Roman official, and then you have these Jewish leaders. And the Jewish leaders are divided into these two kind of sects. There's Pharisees and there's Sadducees. And a lot of the time when we read the Bible and we see Pharisees and Sadducees, we're just like, okay, Jewish religious people. And we just kind of lump them together. But there was actually a deep divide between these two. It's kind of like political parties almost, but there's a religious aspect to it. So it's kind of like you got the Republicans and the Democrats, but then just add in like Christian denomination tension or something like that. Like this is a really tense relationship at times, but right now they're unified against Paul, right? Right now they're unified against Christianity. They want this thing stamped out, and so they are together attacking Paul. But Paul recognizes this, and Paul, he used to be a Pharisee before he became a Christian. He was a Pharisee. He was well educated, and he was one of that camp of Jews. And so he knows what's going on here, and he knows kind of the tension underneath and the conflict. And smartly, he uses it to his advantage. He brings up the idea of the resurrection from the dead, which he knows the Sadducees don't believe in, and the Pharisees do. You see, the Sadducees are kind of like, they're kind of like intellectual, theological liberals of the day. And the Pharisees are a little more, they care a little bit more about the scripture, and they're very much more conservative. And so they believe in the resurrection. They believe that one day people are going to be raised from the dead, and there's going to be life after this one. Sadducees are like, no, there's no life after this one. It's just all about what's happening in this life. So God helps Paul here know what to say. He helps them. He helps Paul to say the right thing that in this situation puts him in the right situation. So what happens is it divides them, and they get so frustrated that they're not attacking Paul anymore. They're attacking one another. So then what happens? Let's go on in verse 10. It says, "When the dissension became violent, The tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from among them by force and bring him into the barracks. So they get so bent out of shape with each other because of Paul bringing up this idea of resurrection that it ends up getting violent. And the military, the Roman official, pulls Paul out of there and is like, all right, this is getting crazy. Let's put an end to this whole thing. So Paul is spared in that moment. Something that we can learn from this, though, is that if you follow Jesus like Paul did, and if you're proclaiming the gospel like Paul did, you're going to run into opposition. It's all over Scripture that when people do the will of God, they run into suffering. They run into difficulty. People aren't always on their side. And that can be a frightening thing. That can scare us. But we can find comfort in the fact that God is with us through all of it. God was with Paul in this moment. When people are attacking him, they're throwing accusations at him, they're trying to get him killed, and yet God is with him. We can put our hope in the presence of God. So God ends up making a promise in verse 11. He says, the following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." So what Paul is saying is, like, don't worry, you're going to make it all the way to Rome, and you're going to be preaching the gospel in Rome. So whatever's happening around here, whoever wants you killed, whoever wants to hurt you, whatever bad things are going on, don't worry, I have a plan. I'm taking you to Rome. I'm taking you to proclaim the gospel further. So at this point, Paul can be certain of his security because God, who controls all things, has promised there's more to come. He's got a bigger plan for Paul. So Paul can take hope because he knows God is there with him through all of it, no matter what opposition he's coming against. There's a missionary named John Paton who said a long time ago, he said this. He said, "I realized I was immortal till my master's work with me was done." He had boldness to go to people who very well could have hurt him, and ended up, I think in John Paton's case, he did get hurt because he was taking the gospel to people. And yet he says, "I'm immortal. No one can touch me. No one can do a thing to me until God's plan with me is done." And that's the same sort of thing that's going on with Paul here. Paul's like, oh, great. I'm going to share the gospel in Rome. Cool. They can't do anything to me in Jerusalem or anywhere before I get to Rome. Nothing's going to happen. And so we need to learn from this. Our future may not be easy. There may be struggles in the future. There may be difficulties, just like Paul. But we as Christians can have hope that through whatever those difficulties are, God's plan is at work, and God is present with us. And until God's plan with us is done, we can't be touched. We can't be stopped. And God will build his church, and he will use us to take his gospel to the nation. He will carry us through this. So let's keep reading in chapter 23, verse 12. It says, "When it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. And there was more than 40 who made this conspiracy. And they went to the chief priests and the elders, and they said, 'We strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we've killed Paul. Now therefore you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. And we are ready to kill him before he comes near.'" So they're plotting to ambush and to find a way to kill Paul without, just illegally, they've given up on the trial. They've given up on accusing him and getting the Romans to kill him like they did with Jesus. They just said, look, we're going to ambush him and we're going to get this guy killed. It's really terrible what they're doing here. But if you skip down to verse 22, not down to verse 22. Verse 16. "Now the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, so he went and he entered the barracks and told Paul. And Paul called one of the centurions and said, 'Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him.' And so he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, and he has something to say to you. And he goes on and he tells them about the ambush that's going to happen. So then skip down to verse 22. So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, tell no one that you have informed me of these things. And then he called 2 of the centurions and said, get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor. And so basically, God ends up using this Roman official to safely deliver Paul to his next destination and to keep him from being killed and to keep him from being ambushed. So God is using people here in this story to execute his sovereign plan. And so remember, God has said, Paul, you're going to make it to Rome. You're going to preach the gospel in Rome. Well, the Jews are trying to kill him, though. But God is going to fulfill his promise. So he uses people. He uses, first of all, a young man who hears about the plot to ambush and who obediently goes and he tells Paul. And then he uses this Roman official who listens to this young man and goes to great lengths to give soldiers and chariots and like all this stuff to protect Paul and to get him to the next place so that Paul can get to Rome. God is using young men and Roman officials to pave Paul's way to Rome to accomplish his purposes. As Christians, this should give us hope in one sense, because it gives us hope that God is going to work in extraordinary ways to accomplish his purpose through us. It also calls us to action, that God has a plan, and we have the opportunity to be part of that plan and to walk obediently and boldly in that plan. We have the opportunity, like this young man who hears of the ambush and takes initiative and goes and he tells Paul and he tells the Roman official, and he helps to be a part of God's plan moving forward. We have the opportunity to be like Paul, who's bold to proclaim the gospel and continue wherever the next step is until he gets to Rome and is proclaiming the gospel in Rome. And we see that that's exactly what happens later on, that Paul does make it to Rome and he proclaims the gospel to all sorts of people in Rome, and it's a really beautiful thing. But for us, we should recognize the presence and the plan of God, that God is here and God has a plan and he's going to accomplish it. And we should seek to be part of that. We should seek to boldly trust him and walk in his plan and figure out how the Lord wants to use us to accomplish his purposes. I would invite you to go online. There are discussion questions on the Buck Run app that I would love for you and your family to talk through. And I will see you next week for Connect.